All right, good morning and welcome. So, quick show of hands. Who here is a baseball fan? All right. How many of you are Red Sox fans? How was that game last night? Tampa did all right. They still have 3 games on the Yankees, so you've got nothing to worry about. I'm a Mets fan. I fully understand that statement. All right. All right. So, as you said, I work at the Baseball Hall of Fame, and my topic of discussion kind of came through my job. So there's a school group coming to do research at the Hall of Fame. We have a large collection of file folders on random topics, as well as a player folder for every player who's recorded 1 out or 1 at bat at the major league level. So, pretty good place if you're going to do research on baseball. So the group's coming, and I get a list of all the subject files, and I find one, Freemasons. Piqued my interest a bit, so after taking care of the school group and getting all that organized, I go and look at that folder. I was surprised to find some documents in there that I wasn't expecting. A lot of stuff about Masonic softball and baseball leagues throughout the country. A few articles about brothers who were Masons, most notably Ty Cobb is the one most people know of. But I came across this one document from a brother, Jerry Erickson, who is from the state of California. He published this in a lot of various publications in the 60s and 70s as his research increased. Now, Brother Erickson did a bulk of the research to come up with a list of famous Masons that are involved in baseball. Not just players, but sports writers, executives, even scouts. And this list has about 560 Masons that are involved in baseball in some way. His final number, I believe, was around 700. I haven't been able to get a physical copy of that list yet, but it's out there somewhere, so I'll find it. But from that, I then started looking at the Hall of Famers that were Masons. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But once I realized this odd number, I started looking into it a bit deeper and found some deeper connections. So that's kind of where we got the start for this presentation. Sorry, folks. No worries. We can. I can just keep going. No big deal. So, real quick, who in the room is a Mason? Show of hands. All right, hands down. Who's not a Mason? All right. All right. Chances are, if you're here, you probably know what a Mason is, right? But just quick definition of terms, though, if you're not familiar. A speculative or Freemason is what most of us in the room are. We use the symbols of stone masonry to kind of build a better ashlar or more perfect self. A operative Mason is someone who physically works with stones. So that's the difference, and we'll be using those terms a little bit as we go through today. Maybe. We'll get it. But anyway, so let's talk a little bit about Masonry. So the definition of a speculative Mason, just went over that, but it's really hard for us to define. So a lot of people, instead of giving an answer as to what is Masonry, we'll talk about who are Masons. So most notably, especially in this room, probably Paul Revere, right? Any of you from a Paul Revere lodge? Yeah, Paul Revere went around just starting lodges, seems like everywhere. What was it, around 20 total, correct? What was the total? 24 lodges that Paul Revere founded, yeah. George Washington, Marquis de Lafayette, the list goes on. Already mentioned Ty Cobb, quite a few famous athletes, half of Abbott and Costello. You have to figure out which half. But yeah, so a lot of famous Masons. And included in that list are quite a few Hall of Famers. Ah, there it is, the National Baseball Hall of Fame. That's where I work. All right. And just down the street from the Hall of Fame is Doubleday Field. And Doubleday Field has its own interesting connection to Masonry, which we'll talk about. And we went through that one. And here we go. So, some famous Freemasons that are also members of the Hall of Fame. Some big names like Ty Cobb. This guy's pretty well known, right? Former Commissioner Happy Chandler. Addie Joss, one of the all-time, well, all these guys are all-time greats. This guy, Rogers Hornsby. Ty Cobb, those guys right there, the all-time batting average champions for their career for a righty and a lefty. Both Masons, Both are actually also Shriners, and we actually have their Shrine Fezzes at the Hall of Fame in our collection, which is pretty fun. All right, so pretty decent list there, right? Go ahead to the next one. It keeps going. So quite a few. Now I will say some of these men only got to the entered apprentice degree. They did not become master masons, but still, they're all masons. And it brings us to a total of 59 masons in the Hall of Fame that are members of the Hall of Fame. So the total number of inductees right now is 312, which takes us to about 19% of all Hall of Famers are masons. Seems a bit off from what the national average of men that are masons is today. And actually looking at the statistics for highest percentage of masons that are a percentage of our population, never got anywhere near 19%. So why are so many masons in the Hall, or why are so many Hall of Famers masons? An odd percentage. Go ahead. But also some non-Hall of Famers that are related to baseball are also masons. Charles Ebbets, longtime owner of the Brooklyn Dodgers. The controversial Charlie Finley, longtime owner of the A's. And Stephen C. Clark. Show hands. Who actually knows who Stephen C. Clark is? All right. So Stephen C. Clark was the gentleman who founded the Baseball Hall of Fame. And not only was he a founder of the Hall of Fame, he was also worshipful master of my lodge, Otsego Lodge 138. So why? Why are all these men masons that play baseball or related to baseball? Clearly, it's a conspiracy. There's a few of them, so there we go. Put that together. Look at that. Those line up perfectly. There you go. That's how we're going to conquer the world. Baseball. But if you invert it, looks kind of like a goat's head, doesn't it? Baphomet, there's all the proof we need. There you go. The conspiracy is confirmed. All right. So in all seriousness, though, there are quite a few people who do believe that Freemasons have a conspiracy through baseball. Proof here in this wonderful YouTube video, which I cannot find anymore. It's a shame it's been taken down. Abner Doubleday, the Freemason that invented baseball. So the conspiracy's out there, but let's talk about it a little bit. Abner Doubleday. Go ahead. We're going to play a game. Usually it's 2 truths and a lie. We're going to play 2 lies and a truth. So let's see if we can get some audience participation here. So someone tell me which one give me one that's a lie with Abner Doubleday. All right. Ooh, hand in the back there. Yeah. He did not invent baseball. Correct. All right. You'll have some prizes coming your way. All right. So yeah, he didn't invent baseball. All right. You got a 50-50 chance here. So let's see hand. Who wants to take a guess for me? All right, right here in the front.
West Point.
He didn't graduate from West Point. Is he correct? Oh. He did graduate from West Point. Actually, the day that he supposedly invented baseball, he was checked in at West Point. So yeah, he did invent baseball, and he's not a Mason. Now, being from Cooperstown and being the lodge historian, I've checked through our records. There are several Doubledays on our rolls, none of whom are Abner. So the legendary origins of baseball, as I said, the idea that Abner Doubleday invented baseball, not true. Despite New York State Highway's wonderful sign that they had placed at Doubleday Field saying otherwise, as someone with 2 degrees in history, this kills me. Oof, that is rough. But this guy, worshipful brother Elihu Finney, who was the first master of my lodge, owned the field that supposedly was the birthplace of baseball. Now, according to legend, Abner Doubleday invented baseball in a cow pasture in Cooperstown in 1839. That is the current location of Doubleday Field. So while we know this isn't true, it's interesting that there actually is a slight Masonic connection to this incorrect story of the founding of baseball. So it's Otsego Lodge number 138, but he was not actually the first master of Otsego Lodge 138. It was actually, can we go back real quick, sorry. He actually was the master of Otsego Lodge number 40 during the anti-Masonic period. We kept meeting, but had some issues with communicating that to Grand Lodge of New York, had to turn in our charter, get a new one. So we lost our number. I'm not bitter about that at all. But I know Massachusetts, you guys don't have numbers, but the lower the number, it's, you know. So, all right. So what are the actual origins of baseball? Well, here they are, maybe. Like I said, I work at the Hall of Fame, and this is exactly how I teach it to school kids when they come. We don't know who invented baseball or when, because we honestly don't think any one person or group did. We do have the Knickerbocker rules, which a lot of people look to as the very first set rules of baseball, which were written by the Knickerbocker Ball Club, and they had that really well-known, if you know your baseball history, game of the Elysian Fields in Hoboken, New Jersey. There's actually a whole plaque there in Hoboken about it. And a lot of people point to that as the first time baseball as we know it was written down with a rule book, but it's definitely not where it was first played. If you look to the left here, anyone recognize this game? Who said Rounders? There you go. All right, Rounders, yeah. So Rounders is a game that I was not familiar with until I spent some time in the UK. Pretty common game over there for school children. If you look at the field setup, that looks really common to a baseball diamond. You've got where the batter is here, you've got the pitcher here in the middle, you've got the first post, second post, third post, but then instead of returning back to where you batted from, you run across this line where the fourth post is. So fairly similar setup to baseball, played quite similarly to baseball, and this is one of many different stick and ball games that kind of influenced and kind of came together to form what we know as baseball today. Now, baseball as we know it today, the rules that are used at the major league level, if you want to go by the first game to go by the current rules as we know them, that would be the first game of the 2018 season. The rules change every year, so it's really hard to pinpoint where these rules as we know them distinguish between baseball, and non-baseball. Okay. So this guy's pretty well known as the father of modern baseball, obviously a Mason and clearly a Hall of Fame member with his plaque there, Alexander Joy Cartwright Jr. As you see there, he's known as the father of modern baseball. Now, modern research since he was inducted maybe says we overstated how much of an influence he had in early baseball, but he was a member of that Knickerbocker club. He did spread baseball as he moved west, and he definitely was a Freemason. So that's great. He spread baseball as he moved across the country. He wound up in Hawaii. So maybe there is some actual connection to the origins of baseball and Masonry. The only problem with that is he didn't become a Mason until he was living in Hawaii after he already spread baseball across the U.S. So sorry, conspiracy theorists, there's still no evidence to support you there. All right, so the legendary origins of Masonry. So the Templar theory, right? Most of you are probably familiar with this one. So October the 13th, 1314, the Templars across France and Europe are arrested. Many of them flee to Scotland, where Robert Bruce is exiled by the Pope, so where better place to find refuge than a kingdom where the king's exiled, right? And they use secret modes of recognition so they could identify one from another. Sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? And then those modes of initiation and rituals developed into Freemasonry. Well, that possibly could be where we came from. We don't actually know. There is some evidence to support that, but not a whole lot. There's a whole lot more we could go into this one, but for the sake of the presentation, we're going to keep all these pretty short. There's also the box club charities theory. I really like this one. In about the 15th century, many trades operated box club charities, and these provided relief to members of a trade in distress. So think of, I don't know, the cobblers, right? The ones who make the shoes, right? So there's a cobblers trade union. They get together and they kind of create a trust, and that trust then will be used to dispense money or give aid to any members of that organization who need it. Sounds pretty familiar again, doesn't it? And there is evidence that towards the end of the Gilded period in Europe, these box club charities began to allow in members who were not members of the trades. So once you start getting non-members in, you start to see it going away from the trade and more towards like a speculative type way of looking at things. And look at that. Again, pretty good theory. There's some solid base evidence there that looks pretty good. As you dig deeper, you might find some issues, but possible origins of Masonry. All right, and then operative transition theory. So operative stonemasons met in lodges. Honorary members brought in more symbolic meaning to the tools used in Masonry. And then industrialization and the Enlightenment really combine to destroy the operative lodges and build the speculative lodges as we know them today. So all three of these are three of many theories of where Masonry came from. But you notice here we've got multiple ideas of where Masonry came from and multiple ideas of where baseball came from. All right, so the actual origins of Masonry. Again, maybe. All right, so the Grand Lodge of England was created in 1717 in England. All right, great. It's a date. Well, it turns out we don't actually know for a fact that it was 1717. The more research that's done, maybe it could have been earlier or later. Noticing a lot of themes here, aren't you? Yeah. Record keeping. Do it. All right. So it spread quickly due to the Enlightenment ideas of the period. All right, the Kilwinning Lodge and other time immemorial lodges. Now, the Kilwinning Lodge is one in Scotland. These both support and challenge this theory. So it supports it as in you do see the records and you see that they are acknowledging, yes, things are happening in England and they're organizing and it's more speculative and it's great. But they also challenge it because, well, if you look down there, the Edinburgh Registry House in Scotland in 1696 has the first evidence of a recorded Masonic ritual. Well, that's before 1717. So the idea that the founding of the Grand Lodge of England is the founding of Masonry as we know it today also isn't necessarily completely true. All right, so here's a quick rundown of what we've covered so far. All right, baseball evolved from other stick and ball games, and Masonry evolved, we think, from stonemason guilds in Europe. No one set date or person created baseball, and again, while there is a set date of here's when the Grand Lodge of England formed, we don't really know when Masonry started either. So pretty similar histories there for both. All right, so let's talk a little bit about a not so happy part of it, segregation and integration. All right, so baseball, post-Civil War baseball, we have some interesting stuff going on. Anyone notice anything interesting with this picture? This is a Major League Baseball team. This guy here? Yeah? That's not Jackie Robinson, so who is he? Anyone know? All right. It's a gentleman by the name of Moses Fleetwood Walker. So immediately after the Civil War, in U.S. history, we see black men from the South being elected into Congress. We see integrated baseball. We see a lot of interesting things happening where the United States doesn't really know how this new race structure in our country is going to play out. And this is what I like to call the happy little period where things happen. Then there's the rise of the Nadir period, or Nadir, depending on your pronunciation. But the Nadir period is where we start to see the rise of Jim Crow and other type of groups like the KKK and that kind of stuff. So in 1887, this period of baseball ends. There's a handful of black men who play baseball, mainly African American, but some Latinos coming up to play as well. And in 1887, the Gentlemen's Agreement in the International League, which is where teams like the Buffalo Bisons, the Rochester, well, today it'd be the Rochester Red Wings, but Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse. So it was kind of that central belt of New York where those teams were playing. They agreed to no longer renew contracts of any black ball players. And this leads to the segregated baseball that lasted for quite a few decades and the eventual creation of the Negro Leagues. And like I said, does reflect a lot of the shift in the U.S. regarding race relations at the time. All right, then fast forward to 1947. These two gentlemen integrate the major leagues. So who's this? Show hands. Someone. All right. Well, you already got one. Someone. Come on. There we go. Jackie Robinson. Beautiful. What about this guy here? He played in 1947. All right. Larry Doby. Great. So Jackie Robinson plays for the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1947. April 15th, he makes his debut. He integrates the modern major leagues, the first player in at least 47 years to play in the majors. Larry Doby integrates the American League, so both leagues are integrated that season. So that's a great thing, right? Red Sox fans. Dirty little part of your history, but it's okay. The Red Sox were the last to integrate 12 years after. Quickly after the integration of Negro leaguers into the major leagues, we see the collapse of the Negro National League in 1949. And the Negro American League holds out until 1960, but you'll see the asterisk there. The quality of play really decreased after about the 1949-1950 season. Not to say that there weren't major league quality players playing there, but there weren't as many major league quality players playing in the Negro Leagues. So we start to see the collapse of the Negro Leagues shortly after integration. All right, and who was partially responsible for this? Well, this guy here, Brother Branch Rickey. Anyone see the movie 42? Yeah, so executive for the Brooklyn Dodgers. He really was the one who made the push to send the scouts to scour the Negro Leagues to find the best fit. Now, you didn't want the best ball player, because Jackie Robinson, I'm not trying to disrespect him in any way, he lettered in 4 sports at UCLA. You have to be a pretty good athlete to do that. But he was chosen not because he was the best player, and ask anyone who played with or against him in the Negro Leagues, he wasn't the best player in the Negro Leagues, but it's because he was the best fit. He had the right temperament, He had the right abilities. He could take what people are going to throw at him and not lash back. And that's exactly what Brother Ricky was looking for. It's worth noting, Robinson, not a Mason, but I think he definitely stood up for a lot of the virtues that we hold dear to our hearts. So let's talk a little bit about segregated Masonry now, shall we? So Prince Hall Freemasonry today, I should say, is not, it tends to be viewed as the Black Lodge. No, it's a historically African-American lodge or set of lodges. So it's not strictly segregated, and I hate when people think that. But anyway, so we look at the most worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge seals here on the left, and we see some of the Negro League seals here on the right, or logos. So American Freemasonry jurisdictions, real quick, all right? So all U.S. states plus the District of Columbia have their own Grand Lodge, right? So here's the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. I'm sure it has a longer name. Same with me in New York. I belong to the Grand Lodge of New York. All right, and as of the creation of this slide, all U.S. standard Grand Lodges recognize each other. You never know, politics go on all the time with this Grand Lodge levels, and I know my Grand Lodge is meeting next week, so who knows who's going to be like, I don't like you anymore, we're not recognizing you. There's other clandestine or non-regular Grand Lodges that are not recognized. There's quite a few of them operating in multiple states. Do a quick Wikipedia search, and it'll give you a full list of different Grand Lodges, many of whom are clandestine. And then Prince Hall Lodges are recognized by most, but not all Grand Lodges. So Prince Hall Freemasonry, again, traditionally African-American jurisdictions. However, I do want to point out, like I said, you don't have to be African-American to join. Most famously, probably Tom DeLonge of Blink-182 is a member of a Prince Hall Lodge. So clearly not an African-American gentleman. Also Angels and Airways. Oh, sorry, go back real quick. No, that was my fault. That was my fault. So most Prince Hall Grand Lodges are recognized by the United Grand Lodge of England. And if you get that recognition, you're usually pretty well recognized by others. Named after Revolutionary-era African-American Freemason Prince Hall, who actually is from the Boston area. And most states have or share a Prince Hall Grand Lodge. I know the mountain states of Utah, Colorado, and one other, forget which one, I want to say Wyoming, share a Grand Lodge, Prince Hall Grand Lodge. So not quite like the other Grand Lodges we've talked about. All right. So these are the states that recognize Prince Hall Freemasonry. And I am happy to say that since I first created this, I had to change this slide. Alabama has added onto the list of states that recognize Prince Hall. So of the 43 U.S. Grand Lodges they recognize Prince Hall, which is 86%. So I think that's pretty decent. I think the map speaks for itself. So all right, moving on. All right, so the founding of African Lodge number 3, or African Lodge number 1. This is what became known as Prince Hall Freemasonry. The traditional story is 15 black men were rejected by Boston's St. John's Lodge. Those men then were initiated as members of Military Lodge number 441 under the Grand Lodge of Ireland. So military lodges were attached to a military unit, and as the unit moved, so would the lodge. So while they were in the greater Boston area, story goes, these men joined that lodge. And then after the military unit left, African Lodge was left to operate funerals, but not to initiate new Masons. Eventually, they got the approval of the Grand Lodge of England to operate as a full-on lodge. This is the pretty standard story that's known in Prince Hall. However, thanks to some more recent research, we know that this, too, is not true. I know. Now, this might be a little controversial. The book just came out recently. It's called Landmarks of Our Fathers. I strongly recommend giving it a read. It actually includes many facsimiles of the documents from the various Grand Lodges involved to prove a pretty solid point that more likely this is probably what happened. All right, so a group of black men were initiated clandestinely by a guy by the name of John Batt. Now, think about this. You're not a Mason. You want to be a Mason, and a guy says, hey, give me some money and I can make you a Mason. Are you going to know any different? No. So that's what these guys did. They thought they were being initiated properly. However, they weren't. Upon realizing that, they petitioned the Grand Lodge of England and were eventually given a charter to operate. And recognition amongst most Grand Lodges was slow, but it picked up steam to the point where the previous slide shows where we are today. So, like I said, this evidence is still fairly new coming out. The book was only published, I believe, in 2017, so maybe 16, but still pretty recent research, so definitely more needs to be done. But this appears to be more likely the actual story of what happened to create our Prince Hall Grand Lodges. All right, so real quick, here we've got a quick breakdown. We've got our self-segregated due to historic discrimination in Masonry. We viewed as equals outside the United States, but not necessarily within. And after recognition, Prince Hall lodges continue to thrive. That's the key. The differences between, the similarities between the two, as you see at the bottom. Today, they're both integrated, but it's also worth noted in baseball, once segregation or integration occurred, those Negro Leagues collapsed. Kind of a mixed feeling there, because there's some great things that happen in the Negro Leagues, but better that they don't exist because, well, there's no need for them to exist, and I think that's a good thing. All right. As you see, the eventual recognition of the segregated branch being as equal to the original, and in baseball, the league was created out of necessity due to segregation. So moving on. All right, so let's talk a little bit about some symbolism and similarities on the actual field of baseball to Masonry. Now, these are very short and brief because, well, I don't want to get too deep into the symbology of things at the moment, but if you want to chat later, I'd be glad to. Feel free to look into it more yourself as well. So first off, all right, ritualism. All right, 50 Cent with his wonderful first pitch. All right, who remembers that happening? Yeah, the umpire did throw him out after. It's worth noting the ball actually leaves the image because it goes so far away from home plate. Look at that. Whoop. All right, so first pitches, very common. All right, you have your first pitch, the national anthem, the announcing of the lineups. There's definitely a ritualism to begin a baseball game. Then you play the baseball game. In the middle of the seventh inning, what happens? Seventh inning stretch for my Red Sox fans. There's a song that plays. What is it? Sweet Caroline. When is it played? All right, thank you. The eighth inning. I was a little worried there for a second. Right, so we have traditions. We have our ritual, right? If you go to a Red Sox game and in the eighth inning they don't play Sweet Caroline, well, that's not right. What's going on, right? Same thing in Lodge, right? How many of you here have ever been Lodge and someone's going and they just get a little off topic and they just skip a whole section of something? You're like, well, that's not right, right? So Lodge and baseball, we work the same way, right? Even at the end of a baseball game, right? Do you just end the game and walk out of the stadium? Right? The team always gives each other their high fives. Any Yankee fans in the crowd? All right. So the Yankee fans, when the Yankees win, what song plays? Frank Sinatra, New York, New York. Exactly. If the Yankees win, you're going to hear Frank Sinatra. If they don't win, you're still going to hear New York, New York. But it's not going to be Frank Sinatra. Now, that's a newer tradition. It didn't used to be. They used to just not play anything. You had to leave in silence, right? But, all right. I'm a Mets fan. When the Mets win, you usually hear Back in a New York Groove's usually the one rocking as you're leaving the stadium. It's a good time, right? So what about Red Sox? You guys have a winning song? I honestly don't know. No? All right, I'm going to take that as a no. All right, so yeah, so you have our rituals at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end. Just like in Lodge, we have our openings, we have our closings, and we've got our things that have to happen in the middle. Baseball, your standard Blue Lodge meeting, pretty much the same thing. All right, circumambulation. Poor Bugs Bunny here is just getting lit up. So poor guy. All right, and then I'm not going to go into too much detail, but yeah, circumambulation, moving in a circular motion. Sound kind of familiar? Yeah? All right. Cool. I won't say any more on that. Moving on. All right. 2 pillars. Now, this might be a bit of a stretch, I'll be honest. But, but it is worth noting, though, that the symbolism of these two things, if you think about them, can actually match up pretty well. I hate that they're called foul poles because they're considered fair, right? You hit the ball off of the foul pole, it's a home run because it's in fair territory. That really bothers me. But so the foul poles, they keep the game within bounds, right? That's its main purpose, to define the boundaries of the playing field. If you're outside of that, you're outside of the playing field. If you're inside of it, you're in play. The symbolism of those 2 pillars, there's quite a bit of it, but if you think about that, they tie in quite well, don't they? Yeah, so I know, bit of a stretch at first, but if you start looking at the actual symbolism of what those 2 things represent, you'll find it. And, is that it? All right, cool. There we go. 4 points or stations. All right, if you really want to think about it in a little bit more detail, I know one side of the lodge room's usually not really occupied by anybody, but if you think about that, though, the 4 cardinal points on a compass and the 4 cardinal stations in baseball do tend to match up, especially since, if you think about sunrise and sunset, most stadiums are set up on a very strict compass setting. Going on. and then the 3 bases and the 3 degrees. Now you'll notice we've got the 1st degree, the 2nd degree, the 3rd degree, right? It matches up there nicely with the baseball diamond. But then at home plate, notice it's not a base, it's a plate. If you call it home base, we're going to have some issues, all right? But so I put the ashlars there because in all honesty, it should be, right? In theory, right? You've got this rough ashlar, you go through the 3 degrees, and then you're not a perfect ashlar, but you're a more perfect ashlar in theory, right? That's how it should be. Right? So same thing. As you go through, you're experiencing the game, you get a better feel for the other team when you're on the base path. You know the pitcher's tells, you know how they're going to play you defensively. You can't pick all those things up from the bench. So as you're going through the baseball diamond and as you're getting through the different stations, second base is one of the best places to be on a baseball field to tell what the other team's doing defensively. Look to your right, you can see almost everybody. Look to your left, you can see everybody. It's great. You know exactly what they're doing defensively. Third base, again, the entire field is in front of you. You can tell what they're doing. Easy to pick off signs and throw it to your batter at home plate. Rockies had an issue with that here recently. Player was standing in front of the runner at second like this so that he couldn't see that the catcher was throwing down for pitch signs. But anyway, so there we go, the 3 bases. So, in conclusion, both have legendary origins and their true origins are unknown. Both have a shared history. They have deeper connections and symbolism based on what you see both in the lodge room and on the stadium. It's also worth noting that, I don't know, Massachusetts, do you guys do a white and black checked floor in your lodge rooms? Yeah? New York doesn't, sorry. But pretty common to see that kind of design on baseball fields as well. So I wonder if there's any deeper connection there other than it looks cool. All right, so thank you very much. And,
yeah.